If we're ready, do you want to jump right into it as far as the playoffs? Because we got a heck of a lot to cover here. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, let's do Broncos Bills. You lead us, Pete.
All right, Josh Allen. Is there anybody better, and is there anybody probably even to some extent, John, maybe as deserving because of what he's been able to accomplish as a player? But there's always been one hitch, to why they're not in the Super Bowl. The Kansas City Chiefs comes to mind. And are they going to be able to get? By the way, Kansas City is a team that's got the bye week this week, and deservedly so. They just had the one loss, but the Bills, John, they're pretty special. I think Josh Allen this year might have had his best year I've seen. And by the way, only 14 sacks this year. The guy has 28 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. He had a remarkable year and running the football, because the people who don't really realize it, because they look at quarterbacks, they don't really see how big they are unless they're standing next to them. Let me tell you something. Josh Allen looks like a tight end when you stand next to him. I mean, here's a guy who's 6'5", maybe even a little bit more, about 245 pounds, maybe a little bit more. I mean, he's a big human being, John. He's a heck of a football player. It's very deserving. But Bo Nix and those guys are coming to town, the Broncos. I don't know how many people had that sitting there, back in August, that the Broncos would be in the playoffs, but they are. Bo Nix is one of the best of the drafted quarterbacks this year. And I think it's going to be an interesting game, but I think Buffalo is going to take it. What about you?
Well, first of all, it's one of the few times I ever get to correct Pete on sports, because the Kansas City Chiefs, you're right, 15-1, Pete, until they played the Broncos the last game and sat 16 players.
Well, yeah.
The NFL version of load management. And back in the old days, Pete, they would have fined them for that.
Yeah.
And maybe they will or did, but those fans in Denver, yeah, they got to see their team beat them, steamroll them 38-0. But come on, that was not a pro football team on the field hardly against
Totally
the Broncos.
agree.
But to your point, Pete, the Broncos, really good sackers. I mean, they have a sack attack that is going to keep Josh Allen in the pocket. Now, if he breaks out of that pocket, that's when he is even more dangerous, because, like you said, size and speed. But I'm going to say Josh Allen and the Bills win, but I don't think they win going away, Pete, like some people think. I think it's going to be a relatively tight game.
Yep, good football team. They are a well-coached football team. Even if I'm not a huge fan of the coach, he's done a great job, so you got to give him his kudos. I mean, sometimes you got to take your opinions and shove them off to the side, and just the reality of what they've done this year. I don't know how many people had them even getting into the playoffs, but I wouldn't say it was a high number. All right, next up, we've got the Packers going out east, John. They're going to Philly against the Eagles. I think it's going to be a really interesting game, but the Eagles, in my opinion, are the far better football team. And I say that because of the fact that Saquon Barkley had a year that was absolutely incredible, right? I mean, the guy rushed for 2,000 yards. He was an absolutely amazing player all year long for them. They've got a great offensive line. If there's any issue at all, it might be just Jalen Hurts. Is he healthy? And they've got some decent backup quarterbacks, but you don't really want to have to count on your backup quarterbacks. I think Jalen Hurts, if he's healthy enough, and I think that he probably will be, he's going to be out on the field, and that's going to make things very, very interesting for sure. And I think that with him, with what they've got on the offensive line, if they can get that running game going against the Packers, I think that they're going to have this one going away. As a matter of fact, when I was on that Fox 9 show, they asked me, they said, what are the odds? What do you think? I said, I think it's 100% that the Eagles win. I still stand by that. I think that that's a really good defense, an outstanding offense. And with Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts, if he's healthy enough, I don't see the Packers. Matter of fact, Love did not look too great, John, in the final game of the season. He had something going on with his elbow. That's never good for a quarterback at all. And they also lost a receiver in Watson. So they're going to be a little bit down maybe. And I think because of that, Philadelphia has the upper hand.
Yeah, the line has spread to at least 4.5 now, Pete. So a field goal was where it started out, and then it just kept going up. And the loss of the receiver, the quarterback looking not so great against a Bears team
Bears team.
that actually beat them. Now, they weren't fighting for anything really, Pete. But I don't think you want to limp into the playoffs. I'm with you. I think that's exactly what they're doing, limping in.
Yeah, I agree with you. By the way, probably the two most surprising, probably the most surprising, the Washington Commanders. I mean, how impressive have they been, John? I mean, Jalen has done an unbelievable job as the quarterback. Jayden Daniels, sorry, I said Jalen. Jayden Daniels, unbelievable season for a rookie. I mean, early in the season, it was absolutely outrageous. It kind of finally started to be a little bit more difficult for him, but nonetheless, what an incredible year he had. That team is well coached. It's been one of these coaches who's been around for quite a while, and he's having some unbelievable success. When you get a quarterback, John, that throws 25 touchdowns and 9 interceptions, but also runs for over 900 yards, I think you found the right guy. And we knew this. You and I talked about him when he transferred to LSU. He was a great player in college, an unbelievable player in college, actually. And then I look over at Baker Mayfield. His best year ever this year with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That team is scary good, I think. And so that's one of those where I think you got to keep an eye on them. The Buccaneers, with him at quarterback, Johnny, threw 41 touchdowns and 71% completions, Baker Mayfield. I would say that's a pretty damn good year for any quarterback at any time. And Baker Mayfield and that team really look good. So I'm going to throw it in there and say, you know what? I think the home team's going to get it. I think the Bucs win this game.
They're given 3 right now, Pete.
Yep.
Baker with his, because he loves giving that. He inspires that team, much like Josh Allen inspires his team. But Josh does it more with his body, and Baker does it both with his body skill, in other words, as well as he's just a very vocal leader. And I think that team is a very physical team as well, just like Philadelphia. So that matchup potentially down the road, I think that's going to be one that there could be a lot of stretchers on the field if Philly's playing the way that I've seen them play in the past, Pete. They are a physical team, and so is Tampa Bay.
Yep, I totally agree with you. A lot of people are not happy with the coach down in Tampa. I'm totally fine with him. I think Todd Bowles does a great job. They don't have a lot of unbelievable players on that team, and yet here they are in the playoffs, and they play some damn good football. And I'll tell you what, Evans is still one of the best receivers in the entire NFL. I mean, he's just a special guy with his size, his speed, and all of that. How about the Vikings and Rams, John? This one, I think this is damned interesting, and here's why I say that. We all know, and we've all been following around and seeing what's going on with the Fires. It's awful. It's unbelievable, really, just to see how incredibly invasive and the speed that's going on with they're talking about 100-mile-an-hour winds, John. I mean, every once in a while they get up to those gusts, but 50, 60, 70-mile-an-hour winds, and sometimes much higher, like I said. I mean, this is an awful situation, and I don't know how they could possibly get it done if they still decide they want to play at SoFi. So it seems to me that the most obvious thing is going to be they go to Arizona. But in any case, the games are going to get played somewhere. Now it's just a matter of where. And my guess would be Arizona. That's what most people have been kicking around, that idea. And does that hurt? You and I talked about this. Does that hurt the home field for the Rams, right? I mean, I think that it probably does a little bit, at least to some degree. But I think the reality is also when you look back at the year and you say, well, who did Minnesota actually lose to? They had a great year. They only had a couple of losses out there. Well, they had 2 losses to the Detroit Lions and 1 to the LA Rams. So if you're wondering where those losses are, it's there. And I'll tell you, John, the Rams are a really good football team, better than people want to give them credit for. And I will tell you this, Matthew Stafford in game 1, and this will be game 2, in game 1, he had 4 touchdowns in that game, John. He threw for almost 300 yards. Stafford, for anybody who thinks he's too old, he's not. He's still great. And when you've got Puka and you've got Kupp, you've got some receivers that really can catch the ball and are very scary, sneaky type receivers that people always underestimate these guys. Even though they've got the names on their jerseys, they still look at them and think, nah, these guys aren't that good. Then they got a great running back in Kieran Williams as well. I mean, that guy in game one against the Vikings had nearly 100 yards on 23 carries. So they've got a running back. They've got a really upper-end quarterback and a couple of unbelievable receivers. I think the Vikings are going to have their hands full.
Yeah, well, the Vikings are getting 3, Pete. That could change, of course, depending on where they relocate the game. And I agree with you. They're going to relocate. It's not going to be played in SoFi. And it's not going to be a slap in the face for LA. They'd love to have it, basically say, hey, we got the fires under control and all that. They do not. And there are a whole bunch of reasons. We don't need to get into that. But I think this is going to be something where the fact that they were able to sit Stafford and Williams and Puka this past week, Pete, and not worry about it while the Vikings had to play their hearts out and couldn't get a 6, couldn't score a touchdown. This is shaping up just like the last time Detroit beat them and they had to go play, the Rams. Now, on the other hand, Pete, if they can't get the right deal done, I'm sure the Vikings would love to host this one. and probably, I bet the Wilfs have already offered it out there to the Rams.
Well, last week they bought $2 million worth of tickets in the Lions Stadium. And let me tell you, as you and I talked about, and I talked to a lot of the people who were out at the game, yes, it was nice that they had the fans right behind the bench and all the rest of that type of stuff. John, let me tell you, when there's 60,000+ people in a stadium and you buy $2 million worth or 2,000 tickets, I'm not really sure that was a dent in the sound. And that volume was high. They turned it up. They were definitely a big part of it in the first half. The second half, when they started to dominate the Vikings, that crowd got even louder, and it made it that much more difficult. So, yeah, very interesting. And I don't know, there's no way in God's green earth they're going to put it over at U.S. Bank. There's just no way. But I like the way you're thinking about that. All right, how about college football, John? It's the first year of this 12-team playoff. Now we're getting to the real nitty-gritty because we're now down to the Orange Bowl and the Cotton Bowl. And I look at this Orange Bowl, I look at Penn State and Notre Dame. Two great franchise-type world, colleges, also football programs forever, have both been absolutely extraordinary. Notre Dame this year had one loss. And their only loss, it wasn't against Michigan. It wasn't against USC. It was against Northern Illinois. I mean, real early in the season,
Week
they
2.
tried. I probably looked past them just a little bit, John. And those things do happen, and that was the problem for them, and that was a big problem because then they had to kind of circle the wagons and try to figure out how do we save this thing. Well, they did a hell of a job. That quarterback, John, he's a dual threat, and he's done it. Riley Leonard, he's done a great job. He came from Duke. And his ability to run the football as well as pass really showed in terms of what Notre Dame could do on the offensive side. Their defense is absolutely a shutdown defense. It's going to be an interesting battle. Penn State's got a great quarterback. A lot of people think that if he came out this year, which he could, but he said he's going to stay, Alar, one of the best quarterbacks in the entire game right now. And you start looking around out there, you see a couple other guys that are on the defensive side of the football that look as good as anybody who's come out of Penn State in a while. And that's another piece to the puzzle. They slammed SMU. They whooped up on Boise State. I mean, when you look at all of what they've done, Penn State looks pretty damn unbelievable. But Notre Dame looks pretty damn good too. They did have to go against Georgia, but Carson Beck didn't get to play, the quarterback for Georgia. That was a bit of a problem. They got 17 points in 54 seconds during that game that basically iced it for them over Georgia. Should be a pretty good football game. I don't know. Which way are you leaning? Right now, for me, Notre Dame just has something special this year. I don't know what it is. Their coach has gotten Coach of the Year and all this other stuff. I really think Notre Dame's got a heck of a good shot, so I'm going to take Notre Dame in this game with Penn State.
I'm right with you, and I think the line should be bigger than 1 or 1.5 Notre Dame favored. I think it should be more, Pete. And to your point, when you talked about the Commanders quarterback, the tremendous athlete that he is. This guy rushed for, your guy, Leonard, rushed for 800, almost 900 yards as well. He didn't throw 41 touchdowns like you said, the Commanders quarterback, but he did throw for 18 touchdowns and like 2,400 yards. So he's the real deal. They've scored over 30 points 9 times this year. And like you said, they made, decent. I don't think either one of us thought SMU or Boise State was really, top echelon. I think there were other teams that could not make it because those guys were automatics. And that's, I don't mean to take anything away from them, Pete. I just mean that I don't think those teams, any of us picking the top 15 would have put those guys in, and they made it into the top 12 because of the way that things were situated. But I think, Notre Dame scored whatever, Penn State against those guys scored almost 70 points against those two schools. I think Notre Dame's a big physical program, and so is Penn State. But I give the edge to Notre Dame by probably 3.
Yep. By the way, Riley Leonard, not only a dual threat, but he had 15 touchdowns on the ground. So yeah, you're right. I mean, the guy could do it in every way that there is. All right, next up, John, we're going to look at Texas, Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. And I think this is going to be a heck of a game. Texas has so much talent on that team. Sarkisian has done a great job of recruiting. They've got plenty of money in the NIL down in Texas. And so they've done an amazing job. They had a great year. Ohio State seems destined. Now, did they have problems in that loss against Michigan where people were actually calling for the head of Ryan Day? I think that's, first of all, ridiculous. I know he's got to beat Michigan at some point, and that's been a struggle for him. But this guy's a damn good coach. He's a great recruiter. He gets the players, John, and Ohio State is probably, arguably, and we'll find out pretty soon, but one of the best teams that I've seen play in a really long time. They've got an incredible receiver, the height, the weight, the size, all the things that go along with it. His hands are incredible. They've got some guys in the secondary that are, again, like they always do. They just reload. By the way, they reload now. They've been doing a great job. Obviously, NIL money doesn't hurt, but with quarterbacks, they had the transfer quarterback from Kansas State, comes to Ohio State, has a hell of a year. I think Ohio State's got him. I really do. Now, that Michigan game, what people forget is that's a rivalry. You throw the records out, and that's all I can say about it is when you line up against Michigan, even though it might be a bad team this year, relatively speaking, you know what? It's still that rivalry, right? I mean, they got up for the game, and Michigan made it happen. And they forced Ohio State into a lot of bad positions. Ohio State had to punt multiple times in the second half. They had a missed field goal. They had interceptions. They ran out the clock. Unfortunately, they had 4 plays and were out, had to give the ball back at the end of the game. There's a lot of reasons why in the second half, Ohio State should have done better, but they didn't. And I think that the reason is the rivalry. Guys elevate to the next level in those games. And we see it happen all the time. Cal, Stanford, Minnesota, Iowa, whatever it is, it's Nebraska, Oklahoma. The better team doesn't always win. And I think Ohio State was the better team. Ohio State's pretty unbelievable. I think Ohio State might take apart Texas.
Well, Matthew McConaughey is not going to like hearing it, Pete. So sorry, Matthew. And if you want to bet, I'll do this. We'll go on your podcast, Matthew. If Texas beats Ohio State, you come on ours. If Ohio State beats Texas, how about that? This guy, Jeremiah Smith, Pete, he lit Oregon up like nobody has lit Oregon defensive backs up. And I think Quinn Ewers is great. Who knows? He might not even be there next year, Pete. He'll be in college. Right. He allegedly will stay in college because he'll make more as a college player than he will turning pro. That's just the, salary cap of rookies. Yeah. It's a rough thing for rookies. So why not make the money? Does he go to, could he go to Ohio State, Pete? Could he go to Michigan or wherever? Sure, he could, and make a lot of money. And then you've only got Manning down there in Texas. But what I'll say, Pete, is Jeremiah Smith could be your Heisman Award winner next year. If he plays like he's played as a freshman, as a sophomore, I think this guy could be your Heisman next year. Nobody can stop him so far. And like I said, nobody has done to Oregon what he and Will Howard did to Oregon just a week ago.
Yeah, they tore him apart. They absolutely ripped him apart. It was not even close, and it was a dominating thing. Last thing I'll say about all this stuff, John, congratulations to North Dakota State. FCS football. It was great. I watched that game the other day. There's a quarterback, Cam Miller, at North Dakota State. And by the way, Trey Lance's brother, who's a wide receiver, who is an absolute freak show athlete, just like Trey Lance. Those are two guys. One of them, I think, is coming out. I think Cam Miller graduates this year. The guy was 86% completions in the national championship game, John. Talk about a baller. The guy also ran for 121 yards. He's a dual threat guy. He'll be in the NFL. He'll be on somebody's roster. And it's just impressive what North Dakota State and South Dakota State and Montana State, what they do each and every year in the FCS. They are all dominating programs, and it's so cool to watch just how good these guys are. I watched that game the other night. It was absolutely phenomenal. By the end, Montana State came all the way up, and they damn near got the game. But congratulations to North Dakota State. They were leading in a big way in the first half, and they hold on for the national title.
Very impressive. I agree. Well, so stay tuned tonight, folks, on ESPN. That's Disney. ESPN, Orange Bowl, Notre Dame, and Penn State. And give us a comment. Let us know what you think of Pete's picks, my picks, and we will be back Monday with the regular Rebels Edge, 1 p.m. Eastern Time.